That ledger is worthless, Robert. Angela Pierce said it in front of the entire factory office, loud enough for the line supervisors to stop walking and the finance team to look up from their laptops. Robert Hayes stood beside the long conference table with both hands on an old factory ledger with ownership entries. The cover cracked, the corners soft, the pages thick from years of dust and fingerprints. He was not wearing a suit. He was wearing a faded gray work shirt with a storage room badge clipped to the pocket. His name was printed in small black letters under the company logo. Robert Hayes, storage room clerk. Nothing about him looked powerful. Nothing about him looked like a man who could stop a multi-million-dollar factory sale. Behind the glass wall, his daughter Sophie stood near the reception desk, holding a handmade factory drawing she had colored the night before. She had drawn the red brick building, the tall loading doors, the American flag near the front entrance, and a small stick figure of her father standing beside a brown book. She had been proud of that drawing when they walked in. Now she held it against her chest like she was trying to hide it. Operations Director Martin Cole gave a small laugh and adjusted his tie. He was standing close to Angela, close enough to look helpful, close enough to guide the room without seeming to lead it. "This is exactly what I warned you about," Martin said, his voice calm, polished, and cold. "Old papers, old rumors, old employees who think memory is the same thing as proof." A few people shifted uncomfortably. Robert did not answer right away. He looked at the ledger, then at Angela. She was a white female CEO of a manufacturing company, known for moving fast, cutting waste, and trusting clean numbers. That morning, she had investors waiting on a video call, attorneys reviewing closing documents, and a sale package sitting in a blue folder marked final. To her, Robert looked like a delay. To Martin, Robert looked like a problem. To Sophie, he looked like the only person in the room brave enough to hold the truth. "Ms. Pierce," Robert said, keeping his voice low, "before you sign the sale authorization, you need to look at page 112. Martin smiled wider. He has been saying that since yesterday. Page 112. Shelf B. Old ink. It all sounds very dramatic until you remember he manages boxes for a living. Robert felt the words land. He had heard smaller versions of them for years. Just the storage guy. Just the single dad who clocks in early and leaves with lunch leftovers in a paper bag. Just the man who knows where forgotten things go. But this time Sophie was there. This time, the words did not just hit Robert. They reached across the room and touched his child. Angela picked up the blue sale folder, but did not open the ledger. "Robert, this company has outside counsel, a real estate team, title reports, county filings, digital archives, and a board that expects this transaction to close before noon. I respect long service. I respect loyalty. But I cannot hold a factory sale because a storage room clerk found an old book." "It is not just an old book," Robert said. "It is the original factory ledger with ownership entries. The transfer chain in the digital file is missing a condition." Martin stepped forward. "There is no missing condition. There is only confusion. And frankly, this is becoming disruptive." Angela looked through the glass wall and noticed Sophie. For half a second, her expression softened. Then the pressure returned to her face. "Robert, your daughter should not have to watch this. Please take her home. Human Resources will speak with you later about why you brought a child into a restricted business meeting." Robert's jaw tightened. "It is family visit morning. The front office approved it last week." Martin lifted one hand as if the detail bored him. "And yet here we are, with a child in the lobby and a clerk interrupting a corporate sale." Sophie lowered her eyes to the drawing. The little brown book she had colored beside her father suddenly looked childish, almost silly. Robert saw that. He saw her thumb rub across the crayon smoke stack until the paper bent. That hurt more than Angela's judgment. Angela closed the blue folder. "Enough. I am not letting this meeting turn into a debate over a dusty ledger. Robert, leave the conference area now. Until this is reviewed by management, you are not to enter the executive wing. If you have concerns, submit them through the proper channel." "The proper channel reports to Martin," Robert said. The room went quiet. Martin's smile disappeared for the first time. Angela's eyes narrowed. "Careful." Robert did not move. "I am being careful. That is why I brought the ledger before the signature." Martin gave a short laugh again, but this time it sounded forced. "Before the signature? Listen to yourself. You think this company is going to lose a buyer because you found handwriting from 30 years ago." Robert opened the ledger. The binding made a dry sound, like a door that had not been opened in years. Several people glanced at the pages despite themselves. The ink was faded but neat. Columns ran across the paper. Date, parcel, owner, transfer note, witness. Robert placed one finger near the margin but did not turn the book toward Angela yet. There is an ownership entry here tied to the original founder trust. It references a transfer condition that does not appear in the digital title summary. Martin stepped in quickly and shut the ledger with his palm. Not hard, not violently, just fast enough to stop anyone from seeing the page. "This is ridiculous," he said. "Angela, the buyer is waiting. We are not entertaining conspiracy theories from the storage room." Robert looked at Martin's hand resting on the ledger. Then he looked at Angela. "Ask him why he does not want you to read one page." The sentence hung in the air. Angela did not answer. She glanced at Martin, then at the blue folder, then at the lobby where Sophie stood frozen with her drawing. The moment was small, but something in it shifted. Martin felt it too. His face stayed controlled, but his eyes moved toward the ledger like it had become heavier on the table. Angela straightened her shoulders. "Robert, step out." This time her voice was final. A security supervisor appeared near the door, uncomfortable but obedient. Robert slowly picked up the old factory ledger with ownership entries and held it against his side. He did not argue. He did not beg. He walked out past the supervisors, past the finance team, past the people who had known him for years but suddenly found the floor interesting. Sophie ran to him without saying a word. Her drawing was wrinkled now. Robert knelt in front of her in the lobby, still holding the ledger. "Did I do something wrong, Dad?" she whispered. Robert shook his head. "No, sweetheart. Sometimes people laugh before they understand." Behind them, through the glass, Angela returned to the head of the table. Martin leaned close and said something Robert could not hear. The attorneys opened the sale documents. The video call screen turned on. The factory clock above reception moved toward 11:45. 15 minutes before the signature. 15 minutes before the building Sophie had drawn might be sold to a buyer who planned to shut it down by summer. Robert stood, took Sophie's hand, and walked toward the exit. But just before they reached the front doors, Sophie stopped. She looked down at her handmade factory drawing, then up at him. "Dad," she said, "why did Mr. Cole close the book if it was worthless?" Robert looked back at the conference room. Martin was smiling again, but now Robert understood something. Martin had not mocked the ledger because it was worthless. He had mocked it because he was afraid someone would read it. Robert looked at the old book under his arm, then at the page marker sticking out near page 112. For the first time that morning, he did not feel embarrassed. He felt certain. And in the quiet lobby of Pierce Manufacturing, while Angela Pierce prepared to sign away the factory, Robert Hayes realized the proof had not failed. It had only not been shown to the right person yet. Robert did not drive home right away. He sat in his old blue pickup in the factory parking lot with Sophie beside him, her handmade factory drawing resting on her knees, and the old factory ledger with ownership entries lying between them like a quiet witness. The lunch bag he had packed that morning was still on the floorboard, untouched. 2 peanut butter sandwiches, 1 apple cut into careful slices, and a small bottle of water he had refilled from the kitchen sink, because buying drinks every day was one of those tiny costs that added up when rent was due in 8 days. Sophie looked out at the red brick factory through the windshield. Workers were moving near the loading dock. Trucks were backing into place. The flag near the entrance snapped in the wind. To most people, it was just another manufacturing plant outside a small American town, loud during the day and tired by evening. To Robert, it was a place with names, dates, shelves, keys, records, and people who depended on it. To Sophie, it was the place where her father wore a badge and came home smelling faintly of cardboard, machine oil, and dust. "Are they going to fire you?" she asked softly. Robert kept both hands on the steering wheel, even though the truck was not running. He wanted to say no. He wanted to say everything would be fine. But single fathers learn not to make promises that bills can break. "I do not know," he said. "But I know I did not lie." Sophie nodded as if she was trying to be older than 9 years old. That hurt him. Children should not have to become strong because adults in suits make small people feel smaller. He looked at her drawing. The factory walls were too bright, the windows uneven, the smokestack leaning to one side. Near the corner, she had drawn him holding a large brown book. She had written "Dad keeps the important things" in purple crayon. Robert swallowed and looked away for a moment. He had never cared much about being important. He cared about being steady. Steady enough to pay rent. Steady enough to get Sophie to school on time. Steady enough to stretch one grocery run over a full week. Steady enough to fix the loose leg on their kitchen chair instead of buying a new one. Steady enough to keep records that other people forgot until they needed them. Every morning, Robert woke at 5:15 in their small rented duplex on Maple Street. The place had 2 bedrooms, thin walls, and a heater that made a knocking sound when the temperature dropped below 40 degrees. The rent had gone up twice in 3 years. The landlord always called it market adjustment, but to Robert it felt like a hand reaching into the same paycheck before he could even deposit it. On the refrigerator, held by a magnet shaped like a yellow school bus, was a calendar with circles around due dates. Rent on the 1st, electric on the 8th, car insurance on the 12th, Sophie's school lunch account every Monday, phone bill near the end of the month. There was no mystery in his money. Every dollar had a place before it arrived. Sometimes that place was already late. Still, Robert did not complain in front of Sophie. He made coffee in the dark. He packed her lunch. He checked her backpack for permission slips, library books, and the little notes teachers sent home in folders that always seemed to ask for $5 here, $7 there, $12 for a field trip, $3 for classroom snacks. None of those amounts looked dangerous on paper, but paper had a way of lying when it stood alone. Robert knew that better than anyone. One small number was nothing. 10 small numbers became pressure. 20 small numbers became a choice. He kept envelopes in a kitchen drawer, labeled in neat black marker. Rent, food, gas, school, emergency. The emergency envelope rarely had much inside, but he kept it anyway because a person needed at least one place in the house where hope had a label. Sophie used to ask why he wrote everything down when the bank app already showed his balance. Robert would smile and say, "A balance tells you what is left. A record tells you what happened." That was how he lived. Not loudly, not proudly in a way that asked for attention. Just carefully. At Pierce Manufacturing, people saw the careful part, but not the reason behind it. They saw him arrive at 7 sharp, badge in, unlock the storage room, check the sign-out sheets, and walk the rows of metal shelves where old files sat in banker boxes stacked by year. They saw a man who knew which cabinet held machine warranties from 1998, which shelf held union notices from 2 plant managers ago, which gray bin held original vendor contracts, and which locked drawer held property maps no one had requested in years. They called it clerical. Robert called it memory. A factory without memory could be sold the wrong way, closed the wrong way, or blamed on the wrong people. He had seen enough to know that records did not look powerful until the powerful needed them. The old factory ledger with ownership entries had been sitting in the back archive cage when Robert first found it years earlier, wrapped in brown paper and tied with faded string. Most people would have thrown it away. It was heavy, old, and inconvenient. The cover did not skin cleanly. The pages were too wide for the office copier. The handwriting changed every few decades as different people took over the record keeping. But Robert liked it for that reason. It felt honest. It carried more than data. It carried hands. Somebody had opened it in 1972. Somebody had written in it during a stormy week in 1986. Somebody had underlined a parcel number in red pencil and written "Do not separate from plant transfer" in the margin. Robert did not know then that those words would matter. He only knew they had been written for a reason. So he placed the ledger in a dry cabinet, logged it in the archive index, and checked it every few months the way some people check smoke detector batteries. Quietly, carefully, no applause. No one from the executive wing ever thanked him for it. Angela Pierce probably did not know the ledger existed until that morning. Martin Cole did. That was the part Robert could not stop thinking about as he finally started the truck and drove Sophie home. Martin's hand on the ledger had been too quick. Not angry, not confused. Quick, like a man closing a window before someone outside sees the light. Sophie watched the factory disappear behind them. "Dad," she said, "why did Miss Pierce believe him?" Robert kept his eyes on the road. They passed a gas station where the price sign made him calculate the tank in his head. They passed the grocery store where he knew exactly which aisle had discounted bread after 6 in the evening. Because his papers looked newer, Robert said. And sometimes people trust new paper more than old truth. Sophie looked down at her drawing again. "But your book was real." "Yes," Robert said. "It was real. At home, the duplex was quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator and the tick of the wall clock above the small dining table. Robert set the ledger down carefully, not beside the bills, not under the mail, but in the center of the table. Sophie placed her handmade factory drawing next to it. The two things looked strange together. One made by a child with crayons. One made by generations of record keepers with ink and patience. Yet somehow they belonged side by side. Both were trying to say the same thing. This place matters. Robert opened the mail. Electric bill. Water notice. A school envelope about next month's art night. A reminder from the landlord that rent was due on Friday, as if Robert had ever forgotten. He laid each paper in its proper pile. Sophie watched him do it. "Do you keep records because you are scared?" she asked. Robert paused. No one at the factory had ever asked it that honestly. "Sometimes," he said, "but mostly because records help people tell the truth when they are tired or nervous, or when someone louder tells a different story." Sophie thought about that. Then she took a purple crayon from her backpack and added something to the drawing. A small gray cabinet behind the stick figure of her father. On the cabinet, she wrote "Old Book." Robert almost told her the words were too simple. Then he stopped himself. Simple words were often the truest. Old book, old truth, old promise. He made dinner from eggs, toast, and the last frozen vegetables in the bag. Sophie did her math homework while he checked the ledger again under the kitchen light. He did not read it like a man searching for revenge. He read it like a man balancing a bank account after a long day, line by line, because one wrong number could change everything. Page 112 still carried the same entry. Factory land parcel. Founder trust. Restricted transfer. See condition on continuation page. Robert turned the page slowly. The continuation page was there in the ledger, but he remembered the digital file Martin had shown last month during archive review. That page had not been included. At the time, Robert thought it was a scanning mistake. Now, after Martin's smile and Angela's dismissal, it felt like something else. Sophie looked up from her homework. "Is that the page?" Robert nodded. "One of them. What does it mean?" He looked at his daughter, then at the rent reminder, then at the old ledger with ownership entries. He knew what people would say if he pushed too hard. He needed the job. He needed the paycheck. He needed the health insurance card in his wallet. He needed gas in the truck and lunch money in Sophie's school account. A storage room clerk did not get many chances to challenge executives and keep his life steady. But dignity was not the same as silence. And caution was not the same as fear. "It means," Robert said slowly, "that before someone sells the factory, they may need to prove it is fully theirs to sell." Sophie's pencil stopped moving. Outside, a car passed by, its headlights sliding across the kitchen wall. Robert took out his phone and photographed the page, then wrote the page number on a yellow sticky note. He placed it beside the ledger, next to Sophie's drawing, next to the bills waiting for money he had not earned yet. Everything important in his life seemed to be on that small table. His daughter, his rent, his work, his proof. And somewhere across town, Angela Pierce was probably still being told that the sale was clean, simple, and ready. Robert looked at page 112 one more time, and for the first time all day, he noticed a name in the margin he had overlooked before. Pierce. By 7:30 the next morning, Angela Pierce was already inside the executive conference room on the third floor of Pierce Manufacturing, standing before a wall of glass that overlooked the factory floor. Below her, forklifts moved between yellow safety lines. Workers checked pallets near the shipping bay, and the old assembly line kept running with the tired rhythm of a business trying to stay alive. Above her, on the screen at the end of the room, a bank presentation showed red numbers in clean columns. Declining margins. Delayed vendor payments. Rising utility costs. A loan covenant review scheduled for Friday. Angela had seen ugly numbers before, but this set felt different. It was not one problem. It was many small problems arriving at the same door. A board member from Chicago appeared on the video call with his camera slightly too close to his face. A lender from the regional bank sat beside two attorneys in navy suits. The company counsel had a stack of closing documents on the table, each page marked with colored tabs. Everyone looked polished. Everyone spoke carefully. Everyone avoided saying the simple truth out loud. The company needed cash, and the fastest cash was the sale of the old factory property. Angela stood with her arms folded, wearing a cream business jacket and a watch that had belonged to her father. She had built her reputation on discipline. She did not panic. She did not waste words. She had taken over the company after years of poor decisions, old machines, and executives who believed loyalty could pay invoices. But that morning, the factory did not feel like an asset on a spreadsheet. It felt like a test she had not studied for. Operations Director Martin Cole sat 2 chairs to her right, with a leather folder open in front of him. He looked calm in the way experienced corporate men look calm when they have already decided which facts matter and which facts should stay hidden. The buyer is ready, Martin said. They have agreed to keep the name through the transition period. They are prepared to wire the first payment after signature. If we delay, we risk losing the best offer this property will ever see. The banker nodded. From the bank side, closing the sale would improve liquidity before covenant review. We cannot advise management on strategy, but timing matters. Angela looked at the factory below. A welder lifted his face shield. A line worker waved to someone near the loading dock. For a moment, she remembered Sophie's handmade drawing from the day before, the crooked smokestack, the small figure of Robert holding a brown book. Angela pushed the image away. What about the title concern? She asked. The room went still for half a beat. It was not much, but Angela noticed silence the way she noticed numbers. Martin gave a soft sigh, as if she had raised an issue already settled by better minds. The title concern came from Robert Hayes, a storage room clerk, not legal counsel, not the bank, not county records, not our real estate team. That is not what I asked, Angela said. Martin turned 1 page in his folder. The digital title summary shows clear ownership under Pierce Manufacturing Holdings. The parcel was transferred decades ago. The old materials and storage may contain outdated references, but they do not change current ownership. Company counsel, a thin man named David Bell, adjusted his glasses. I reviewed the summary provided to our office. On its face, it is clean enough to proceed with conditional language. That said, I have not personally reviewed every historical archive document. Martin looked at him quickly. No one is asking you to review every old box in the building, David. That is exactly how companies lose deals. We have a verified summary. Angela heard the edge in his voice. Martin usually sounded smooth. This was sharper. Robert mentioned an old factory ledger with ownership entries, Angela said. Has anyone compared it to the digital summary? Martin smiled, but his eyes did not. Angela, with respect, if we start comparing every handwritten ledger to modern legal documents, we might as well stop running a company and open a museum. One board member laughed faintly through the video call. Angela did not. She walked to the screen and studied the property map. 22 acres. Main plant. Storage wing. East loading yard. A small strip of land near the railroad spur. The sale price sat in bold type at the bottom of the slide. It was not enough to make the company safe forever, but it was enough to breathe. Enough to calm the bank. Enough to buy time. In corporate rooms, enough often becomes a dangerous word. It sounds responsible. It sounds clean. It sounds like survival. Martin knew that. He had built the whole decision around it. The board needs confidence, said the director from Chicago. We cannot have a clerk derailing a transaction because he feels attached to old records. Angela's face tightened. No one is derailing anything yet. Yet, Martin repeated gently. That is the problem. Uncertainty spreads fast in a factory. Yesterday, 3 supervisors asked whether the sale was legal because Robert carried that ledger around like evidence in a courtroom. If employees believe ownership is disputed, morale drops, buyer confidence drops, and the bank asks more questions. We cannot let a misunderstanding become a crisis. He was good. That was what made him dangerous. He did not sound like a man hiding something. He sounded like a man protecting the company from disorder. He spoke the language Angela trusted. Timing, confidence, buyer risk, morale, liquidity. He turned fear into procedure. Angela sat at the head of the table. Where is the ledger now? Martin looked down at his folder. Robert took it home, according to security. Angela looked up. He took company property home? After being instructed to leave the executive wing, Martin said, I did not want to make a scene with his daughter present. The sentence carried just enough concern to sound kind and just enough accusation to land. Angela felt irritation rise again, not only at Robert, at the timing, at the old building, at the way every solution seemed to come with another question attached. Have human resources call him, she said. Ask him to return the ledger today. We should suspend his access until we understand what he copied, Martin said. Angela looked at him. Copied? If he believes the ledger matters, he may have photographed pages. He may send them to people who do not understand corporate documents. He may create noise before the closing. The banker shifted in his chair. The word noise had done its job. Banks disliked noise. Boards disliked noise. Buyers disliked noise most of all. Angela turned back toward the window. Down below, a row of workers in blue shirts moved through the plant like the factory was still solid beneath their feet. They did not know that upstairs, strangers were discussing the land under their boots as if it were a line item to be rearranged. Angela had told herself the sale would protect them. Martin had told her the buyer planned to keep operations steady for at least 18 months. The letter of intent said as much, though the language was softer than she liked. She had asked for stronger language, but Martin said pushing too hard might scare the buyer away. Now she wondered why every careful question seemed to lead back to Martin telling her not to slow down. In the legal office across the hall, assistants were preparing signature packets. In the investor room downstairs, coffee had been set out in paper cups near a tray of pastries no one would finish. On the factory floor, shift leads were being told to keep production moving and avoid rumors. Everything had the appearance of order. That was what frightened Angela most. Disorder announced itself. A hidden crisis wore a pressed suit and carried a clean folder. Martin closed his leather binder and stood. Angela, the sale is the bridge. Without it, the bank tightens, suppliers get nervous, and we start cutting from the inside. I know Robert seems sincere, but sincerity does not pay debt. Sentiment does not satisfy lenders. And an old factory ledger with ownership entries does not outweigh a title report. Angela turned from the window. Then you will not mind if legal reviews it. The room quieted again. Martin held his expression in place, but the corner of his mouth moved almost too quickly to notice. Of course not, he said. After closing, we can archive it properly. Before closing, Angela said, I want the ledger returned and scanned before final signature. David Bell looked relieved. The banker looked annoyed. The board member on screen looked impatient. Martin looked calm again, but Angela could feel something beneath the calm. A locked door. A covered page. A number that did not belong. That may create unnecessary delay, Martin said. Then we will make it a necessary one, Angela replied. For the first time that morning, Martin did not answer immediately. He glanced at the property map on the screen, then at the blue folder holding the sale documents. He had planned a secret sale around speed, around pressure, around the belief that nobody with power would listen to a storage room clerk holding an old book. But Angela had heard one sentence from a child in the lobby, and it had stayed with her longer than any executive summary. Dad says that is where the factory remembers who it belongs to. Angela did not believe Robert yet. Not fully. She still believed the bank, the lawyers, the title summary, the board packet, and the clean digital files. But belief is not the same as certainty. And as Martin walked out of the conference room to call human resources, Angela looked again at the 22 acres on the screen. For the first time, the factory did not look like something she was about to sell. It looked like something she might not completely understand. Robert Hayes returned to Pierce Manufacturing at 9:15 with the old factory ledger tucked inside a plain cardboard file box and Sophie walking beside him, still holding her handmade factory drawing as if it were a small shield. He had called the school office that morning and explained that Sophie would be late. He did not say why. Some things were too heavy to explain to his secretary over the phone while packing a child's lunch and counting the dollars left for gas. The factory looked normal when they arrived. Trucks rolled past the gate. A forklift beeped near the loading area. Men and women in work shirts moved through the side entrance with coffee cups and tired faces. Nothing about the morning said that upstairs, a decision was being rushed that could change all their lives. Robert signed in at the front desk, but the receptionist did not smile the way she usually did. Her eyes moved to the cardboard box, then to Sophie, then to the security supervisor standing near the elevator. Mr. Hayes, she said quietly, Human Resources asked that you wait here. Robert looked toward the executive wing. Ms. Pierce requested the ledger. I know, the receptionist said. But they said you are not supposed to go past the lobby. Sophie looked up at him. Robert felt her hand tighten around two of his fingers. He could feel the whole room watching without looking directly at him. That was how people watched a man who might be in trouble. Not with open staring. with small glances, with lowered voices, with sudden interest in papers that did not need reading. The security supervisor cleared his throat. Robert, I am just doing what I was told. You can leave the box with me. Robert shook his head. This ledger should not leave my sight until legal receives it. That sounds like you do not trust us, the supervisor said. It means I understand records, Robert answered. His voice was not loud, but it carried. A few people at the front desk went still. Robert saw Martin Cole step out of the elevator at the far end of the lobby. He wore a dark suit and carried a phone in one hand. His face held the smooth patience of a man who wanted witnesses. Robert, Martin said, walking closer. You are making this harder than it needs to be. Robert kept one hand on the cardboard box. I brought what Angela asked for. Ms. Pierce asked for company property to be returned, Martin said. Not for you to create a scene in the lobby with your daughter standing here. Sophie looked down at her drawing. The paper was already wrinkled from the day before. Robert heard the hidden accusation. A good father would not involve his child. A good employee would hand over the box. A good little clerk would stop asking questions. Martin knew how to turn dignity into guilt. Robert had seen men like him do it in meetings, in employee reviews, in quiet hallway conversations that left people apologizing for telling the truth. Sophie had family visit approval, Robert said. She is here because I was told yesterday to take her home after being humiliated in front of her. Martin's expression did not change, but his eyes hardened. Careful, Robert. Words like that can affect your employment record. The elevator opened again before Robert could answer. Angela Pierce walked out with company counsel David Bell beside her. She looked tired, but controlled. Her cream jacket from the morning before was gone, replaced by a navy blazer and a white blouse. She looked like she had slept little and decided that sleep was not required. Her gaze moved from Robert to Sophie, then to the cardboard box. You brought the ledger, she said. Yes. Then give it to legal. Robert looked at David Bell. I will give it to him in a conference room, with a receipt, and with a record of which pages are copied. Martin laughed softly. A receipt? For a ledger you removed from company property without authorization. Robert looked at Angela. I removed it after Mr. Cole shut it before anyone could read the page. I took it home because I believed it was at risk of disappearing. The lobby went quiet. Even the receptionist stopped typing. Angela's face tightened. That is a serious accusation. It is a serious pattern, Robert said. Page 112 is missing from the digital packet. The continuation page is missing too. The ledger has both. David Bell leaned slightly forward. Which continuation page? Martin cut in before Robert could answer. David, please. We are not cross-examining an employee in the lobby. Angela raised one hand. Let him speak. For the first time since Robert arrived, Martin looked directly at Angela with open frustration. We have a buyer in the investor room. The bank call is at 10. The board expects final authority by noon. If we turn this into an archive review, we may lose the transaction. If the transaction is clean, Robert said, one page will not hurt it. Angela turned on him. You do not get to decide what hurts this company. Sophie flinched at the sharpness in her voice. It was small, but Robert saw it. Angela saw it too, and for a moment regret crossed her face. But pressure has a way of making people cruel before they have time to be honest. She looked back at Robert. You are a storage room clerk. Your job is to maintain records, not interpret corporate ownership. Robert nodded once. That is exactly what I am doing. Maintaining the record before someone uses an incomplete one. Martin stepped closer. No, you are refusing a direct instruction. You are implying that company leadership is hiding information. You took property home. You photographed documents. You are speaking about title issues you are not qualified to understand. This is not diligence. This is insubordination. The word landed hard. Insubordination. It sounded official. It sounded final. It sounded like rent trouble, insurance trouble, school lunch trouble, and a little girl asking why her father could not go to work anymore. Robert felt the fear rise in his chest, but he kept his face still. Quiet dignity was not the absence of fear. It was standing straight while fear counted everything you could lose. Angela looked at the cardboard box again. Robert, open it. Robert placed the box on the lobby table and lifted the lid. The old factory ledger with ownership entries lay inside, wrapped in clean brown paper. On top was a yellow sticky note with 3-page numbers written in Robert's neat hand. Page 112. Page 113. Parcel condition. Sophie stepped closer to the table, still holding her drawing. Martin's eyes dropped to the sticky note. He saw the words, and something passed across his face so quickly most people would have missed it. Robert did not miss it. Angela did not either. Why does that note say parcel condition? Angela asked. Robert took a slow breath. Because the original transfer entry does not stop on page 112. It continues. The digital archive stops before the condition. David Bell looked at Martin, who supervised the archive packet for the sale. Martin's answer came too fast. Records pulled the files. Legal reviewed them. Operations only coordinated. Robert shook his head. No. Operations requested the transfer packet 3 weeks ago. Your assistant signed the storage log. Box R17. Blue archive cart. Thursday morning. Martin stared at him. You remember a cart from 3 weeks ago? I keep the sign-out sheets, Robert said. That is my job. Angela looked at Robert differently then. Not kindly. Not fully. But differently. For a second, he was not just the man in the faded work shirt. He was the man who knew where the paper trail began. Martin sensed the shift and moved quickly. This is exactly the problem. He is building a story out of routine paperwork. Angela, if you let this continue, the buyer will walk. The buyer can wait 20 minutes, David Bell said. Martin turned to him. No, David. The buyer has already expressed concern about employee rumors. Angela's phone vibrated. She checked the screen. A board member. Then another message appeared. Investor group waiting. Then another. Bank call moved to 11:30. Pressure gathered around her again, invisible but heavy. She closed her eyes for 1 second, then opened them with the look of someone choosing speed because speed feels like control. Robert, she said, give the ledger to David and return to the storage room. You are not to speak to employees about ownership, the sale, or this ledger. You are not to copy another page. You are not to contact county offices, former employees, or anyone outside the company about this matter. Do you understand? Robert did understand. He understood that truth was being placed on a schedule written by people who feared delay more than error. He understood that Martin wanted him quiet before noon. He understood that Angela was not yet seeing the trap, only the clock. I can return to the storage room, Robert said. But I cannot say the record is complete when it is not. Angela's expression cooled. Then you are leaving me very few options. Sophie's eyes filled, but she did not cry. She folded her handmade factory drawing once, carefully, as if making it smaller would make the moment hurt less. Robert wanted to reach for her, but he stayed still. Martin looked toward security. Angela, we should remove his system access until after closing. David Bell frowned. That may be premature. The deadline is not, Martin said. If final authorization is not signed by noon, the buyer can trigger the walk-away clause. Angela looked from Martin to David, then to Robert. The lobby clock clicked toward 10 o'clock. 2 hours before noon. 2 hours before the sale could become real. 2 hours before a missing page might be buried beneath a signed agreement. Angela picked up the sticky note from the ledger and held it between 2 fingers. Robert Hayes, you have until 10:30 to return to your post and submit 1 written statement to legal. After that, if you interfere with the closing process again, your badge will be suspended pending review. Sophie looked up at her father, and the drawing trembled in her hands. Robert did not look at Martin. He did not look at the security supervisor. He looked at the old factory ledger, opened just enough for page 112 to show its faded edge beneath the brown paper. Then he looked at Angela and said quietly, 30 minutes is not much time for the truth. Angela did not answer. Martin did. Then you should not waste it. Robert carried the old factory ledger with ownership entries back to the storage room at 10:05, with Sophie walking beside him and trying not to look at the employees who had turned their heads as he passed. The storage room felt colder than usual. It was a long, narrow space behind the old shipping office, lined with metal shelves, gray boxes, rolled maps, retired machine manuals, and filing cabinets with labels that most people had stopped reading years ago. To Angela Pierce, it was a back room. To Martin Cole, it was a place where old paper should have stayed quiet. To Robert Hayes, it was the memory of the company, and memories had rules if you wanted them to tell the truth. He set the ledger on the wooden work table where he usually checked inventory sheets. Sophie placed her handmade factory drawing beside it, smoothing the folded crease with both hands. She had drawn the factory in bright red and blue, but now the paper looked tired, as if the morning had aged it. Robert looked at the clock over the shelf marked Payroll Archives. 10:07. He had 23 minutes before Angela's deadline. 23 minutes to write a statement, return to his post, and stay silent while a factory sale moved toward noon. He took a legal pad from the drawer and uncapped a black pen. For a moment, he stared at the blank page. How could he explain 30 years of record keeping to people who thought speed was proof? How could he say that one missing page could matter more than a full binder of clean reports? He wrote the first line slowly. The digital ownership packet appears incomplete. Then he stopped. Appears was too weak. Incomplete was too polite. He turned back to the ledger and opened it to page 112. The old pages made a soft sound beneath his fingers. Sophie stood on a stool beside him, not touching anything, only watching. "Is this the page they do not want?" she whispered. "It is one of them," Robert said. The entry was written in blue-black ink that had faded at the edges. The handwriting leaned slightly to the right. Date, parcel number, founder trust, factory transfer, witness initials, continuation note. Robert read the same line again, the line he had seen the night before, but this time he did not rush toward the obvious words. A record keeper learns that truth often hides in the boring parts, not in the big names, not in the signatures, in the margin, in the number that does not match, in the word someone copied wrong because they did not think anyone would check. Robert leaned closer. There was a small mark beside the parcel number. Not a smudge, not a stain, a tiny triangle drawn in pencil. He had seen that mark somewhere before. He turned back 3 pages, then 5 pages, then 10. The same triangle appeared beside certain entries, always next to land parcels that had conditions attached. He went to the shelf behind him and pulled down a narrow green binder labeled Archive Symbols and Transfer Notes. It was not in the digital system. It had been made by an older records manager named Mrs. Hanley, who retired before Angela became CEO. Most people thought the binder was useless because it did not look official. Robert had kept it because Mrs. Hanley had written on the front page, "Do not discard. Explains ledger marks." He opened it and ran his finger down the list. Circle meant tax map attached. Star meant survey required. Triangle meant restricted transfer. See trust condition. Robert felt the room become very still. The tiny detail was not the old handwriting. It was not even the missing continuation page. It was the triangle. Whoever scanned the digital packet had copied the entry, but not the mark. They had kept the words and lost the warning. Sophie watched his face change. "Dad." Robert did not answer right away. He turned the ledger to page 113. The continuation page referenced the same triangle and a trustee condition. Then he opened the green binder again and found the matching explanation. Restricted transfer. No sale, lease, or conveyance of factory land without confirmation of trustee release. Attached original release must be filed with county clerk. Robert read the sentence twice. Then a third time. The words were not dramatic. They did not shout. They did not look like something that could stop a room full of executives. But they were clear. A sale needed the release. The digital packet did not show it. The blue folder upstairs might have a title summary, a valuation, and a buyer's signature page. But if it did not have that release, it might be standing on air. Robert reached for the sign-out binder on the lower shelf. His hands moved faster now, but not carelessly. He flipped to 3 weeks earlier. The Thursday Martin's assistant had pulled box R17. There it was. Requester. Operations. Purpose. Sale packet. Items removed. Property transfer file. Digital scan copy. Title summary support. Return date. Blank. Robert stared at the empty return line. The box had never come back. He checked the shelf. Box R17 was missing. Not misplaced. Missing. The tiny detail had opened a larger door. Sophie looked from the ledger to the shelf. Is something gone? Robert closed the sign-out binder slowly. A box that should be here. Did Mr. Cole take it? Robert looked toward the storage room door. He did not want to teach his daughter to accuse people without proof. But he also did not want to teach her that silence was the same as fairness. His department signed it out, he said. That is what the record says. The phone on the wall rang before Sophie could ask more. Robert picked it up. Storage. Martin's voice came through smooth and tight. Robert, Ms. Pierce is waiting on your written statement. I hope you are not using these 30 minutes to dig through more records. Robert looked at the open ledger, the green binder, the missing box entry, and Sophie's drawing beside them. I am writing the statement now. Good. Keep it short. Your role is not to investigate. My role is records. Your role, Martin said, the softness leaving his voice, is whatever this company says it is. Robert held the receiver and said nothing. Silence made some men uncomfortable. Martin filled it. Let me be very clear. If you continue implying that this sale is improper, you could be suspended before lunch. You have a daughter in the building again. Think about what kind of day you want her to remember. Robert looked at Sophie. She was pretending not to listen, but children hear the things adults try to hide. Her pencil rested on the factory drawing, the point shaking slightly. Robert lowered his voice. She will remember whether her father told the truth. Martin paused. When he spoke again, he sounded almost friendly. That was worse. Truth is a big word for a man holding a dusty book. The line clicked. Robert hung up and stood there for a moment. He knew what fear wanted him to do. Fear wanted him to write a soft statement, return the ledger, go back to stacking boxes, and hope the paycheck still came on Friday. Fear sounded reasonable. Fear sounded like rent. Fear sounded like school lunches and gas prices, and the emergency envelope in the kitchen drawer with only $18 inside. But the old ledger did not care about fear. It only carried what had been written. Robert turned back to the legal pad. He crossed out his first sentence and started again. The ownership packet used for the proposed factory sale omits a restricted transfer mark shown in the original ledger. The mark is identified in the archive symbols binder as a trustee condition. Box R17, which likely contains related release documents, was signed out by operations 3 weeks ago and has not been returned. He added the page numbers. He added the binder label. He added the sign-out date. Simple. Clear. No anger. No guessing. Proof did not need to sound emotional. It needed to stand still when people pushed it. At 10:26, he carried the statement, the ledger, the green binder, and the sign-out sheet copy back toward the lobby. Sophie walked beside him, holding her drawing with both hands. Near the elevator, Angela Pierce was waiting with David Bell. Martin stood a few feet behind her, checking his watch. Angela looked at the stack in Robert's arms, and her face hardened again. I asked for one written statement, she said. Not another archive card. Martin gave a small smile. This is what I mean. He does not know where his job ends. Robert did not look at Martin. He looked at Angela. I found the detail that explains why the page matters. Angela's eyes moved to the green binder. What detail? Martin stepped in at once. Angela, the buyer is already asking why legal has not joined the call. We cannot keep feeding this. Robert opened the ledger carefully and pointed to the tiny pencil triangle beside the parcel number. This mark. Angela stared at it. For a second, nobody spoke. Then Martin laughed, not loudly, but enough for the nearby staff to hear. A pencil mark. We are delaying a factory sale over a pencil mark. Angela exhaled, and Robert saw doubt return to her face. Not because the mark meant nothing, but because it looked too small to carry the weight he was giving it. That was how important things got dismissed. They looked small until they were missing. David Bell leaned closer. What does the mark mean? Robert lifted the green binder. Restricted transfer. Trustee condition. It says the release must be filed before any sale or conveyance of the factory land. Martin's smile faded just a little. Angela noticed. Robert noticed Angela noticing. But then her phone rang, and the name of the board chair flashed on the screen. The clock above reception read 10:30. The deadline had arrived. Angela did not take the binder. Not yet. She looked at Robert, then at Martin, then at the ledger open in his hands. Bring it to legal, she said finally. But Robert, this is the last delay I allow before noon. Martin looked away toward the investor room, but his jaw tightened. Sophie stepped closer to her father and whispered, The little triangle matters, does it not? Robert looked down at the tiny mark, then at the blue sale folder visible through the glass office door. Yes, he said softly, and I think someone knew it did. By 10:45, the pressure inside Pierce Manufacturing had stopped feeling like pressure and started feeling like weather. It moved through the building before anyone could name it. The investor room went quiet. The bank call was pushed forward, then pulled back, then pushed forward again. Legal assistants carried folders across the hallway with their phones pressed to their ears. Supervisors on the factory floor were told to keep production moving, but the workers had already noticed too many executives walking too fast. A truck driver at the loading dock asked whether the plant was closing. A payroll clerk asked whether Friday checks were safe. A vendor called twice about an overdue invoice and then asked for written confirmation before shipping parts. Nothing had collapsed yet, but everything had begun leaning toward collapse. Angela Pierce stood in the legal office beside a long table covered with documents. The old factory ledger with ownership entries lay open near the center, surrounded by the green archive symbols binder, Robert Hayes's written statement, a copy of the sign-out sheet, and the glossy sale packet Martin Cole had prepared. The difference between them was almost embarrassing. Martin's packet looked expensive. Thick paper, clean tabs, corporate language. The ledger looked tired. It smelled faintly of paper, dust, and storage cabinets. Yet every person in the room kept looking back at it. David Bell, company counsel, had removed his glasses and was rubbing the bridge of his nose. The triangle mark is real, he said carefully. The archive binder identifies it as a restricted transfer notation. That does not automatically mean the sale is blocked, but it does mean we need to locate the trustee release or confirm it was filed. Martin Cole stood near the window, arms crossed. David, with respect, this is an internal archive notation. It is not a court order. It is not a current title objection. It is not a bank freeze. It is a mark in an old ledger. Robert stood near the door, not seated, because no one had offered him a chair. Sophie sat on a bench outside the glass office, holding her handmade factory drawing and watching her father through the doorway. Robert could see the drawing in her lap. She had added the gray cabinet, the old book, and the tiny triangle after he showed her where it appeared in the ledger. She did not understand trust conditions or title summaries, but she understood when adults were pretending not to see something. Angela looked at Martin. Where is box R17? Martin's face did not move. I do not track individual archive boxes. Robert spoke before he could stop himself. Your department signed it out. Martin turned toward him slowly. My department signs out hundreds of files. Operations coordinates records for multiple projects. This was not multiple projects, Robert said. It was the sale packet. Thursday morning. Your assistant signed the log. The return line is blank. Angela looked at David. Can we proceed without that box? David hesitated. That hesitation did more damage than a no. We can proceed if the buyer accepts the risk and if we include expanded indemnity language. But if there is a missing release tied to the land parcel, we may be inviting a title dispute after closing. The banker, listening through the speakerphone on the table, cleared his throat. From the lender's side, a title dispute on primary collateral would be a problem. I need to be very clear. If the sale is delayed and the liquidity event does not occur before covenant review, the bank may have to restrict certain company accounts until we understand the impact. Angela turned toward the phone. Restrict accounts how? Controlled disbursements, the banker said. Additional approvals. Possibly a temporary hold on non-essential outgoing payments. Robert saw the payroll clerk through the glass hallway, standing outside with a folder against her chest. She looked pale. Angela saw her too. Payroll is not non-essential, Angela said. Of course, the banker replied. But if the covenant issue is triggered, everything gets reviewed. There it was. Not a dramatic crash. Not a sudden disaster. Just words spoken in a calm banking voice that could make hundreds of workers wonder whether their paychecks would arrive. Martin stepped away from the window. This is exactly why delay is dangerous. The bank is telling us what happens if we miss the timeline. The buyer is ready. The funds are ready. If we close by noon, liquidity improves, the covenant issue calms down, payroll stays clean, and we can review archive questions afterward. David looked up sharply. After closing is when the title dispute becomes harder. Only if there is a dispute, Martin said. And right now, the only dispute comes from a storage room clerk, a pencil mark, and a missing box that may simply be on the wrong shelf. Robert felt the insult, but he did not react. He had learned years ago that anger made people look away from proof. So he did what he always did. He returned to the record. Box R17 is not on the wrong shelf, he said. I checked the overflow cage, the legal archive wall, and the basement map cabinet. It is not there. The sign-out log says operations took it and never returned it. Martin's voice hardened. You checked those areas after being told not to continue investigating? Angela turned to Robert. Is that true? Robert looked at her, then threw the glass at Sophie. Yes. The word was simple, but it cost him. Angela's face changed from uncertainty to disappointment. Martin moved quickly into that opening. This is no longer about the ledger. Robert has ignored a direct instruction during an active transaction. He is moving through restricted records, making copies, questioning title, and now speaking in front of the bank. If any buyer representative hears this, they can claim we failed to control internal information. That gives them leverage. It may even let them lower the price. Angela looked down at the ledger. The tiny triangle sat beside the parcel number, quiet and stubborn. "Robert," she said, "why did you continue after I told you to stop?" Robert kept his hands at his sides. "Because stopping would not make the missing page appear." Martin gave a tired laugh. "That sounds noble. It also sounds reckless." "Reckless is selling land with an incomplete record," Robert said. David Bell lifted one hand. "Let us stay focused. We need the trustee release. If the release exists, we can resolve this quickly. If it does not, the sale has to pause." Martin turned to Angela, no longer hiding his urgency. "And if the sale pauses, the bank tightens, the buyer walks, the board blames leadership, and the factory starts bleeding cash by Monday. We do not have the luxury of perfect paperwork." Perfect paperwork. Robert almost repeated the words, but he knew the trap inside them. Martin was making the truth sound like luxury. He was making proof sound expensive. He was making speed sound responsible. Angela walked to the window of the legal office and looked down at the factory floor. A row of workers moved parts through the main line. They did not know that the company's future had been reduced to a triangle mark, a missing release, a bank covenant, and a sale clock. She had spent her whole career making hard decisions. Close a division to save a company. Sell equipment to protect payroll. Cut executive perks before touching wages. She knew leadership was not softness, but she also knew fear could dress itself as leadership. That was the part she hated. Behind her, the speakerphone beeped as another person joined. The board chair's voice filled the room. "Angela, we need an answer. The buyer has signaled they will not hold terms past noon. If this delay continues, they reserve the right to withdraw or renegotiate." Martin lowered his eyes, but Robert saw satisfaction move through his face. Not victory, exactly. Relief. A man benefits from the wrong decision when the wrong decision must be made quickly. "Angela," Martin said, "we can protect the company now and clean the archive later. Or we can let an old ledger blow up a deal we need." Sophie shifted on the bench outside. Her drawing slipped from her lap and landed face up on the floor. Robert saw the factory she had drawn. Bright windows, red bricks, a crooked smokestack, a small figure of him holding the old book. People saw a child's picture. They did not see the question inside it. Who gets to sell a place before they know who it belongs to? Angela turned from the window. Her eyes moved from Sophie's drawing to Robert, then to Martin, then to the phone where the board chair was waiting. "David," she said, "prepare a risk memo. Include the ledger issue, the missing box, and the restricted transfer notation." David nodded, relief crossing his face. "And the sale?" he asked. Angela paused. For one brief second, Robert thought she might stop it. He thought the tiny triangle had done enough. He thought the old ledger had finally become louder than the room. Then Martin said quietly, "Payroll, Angela." The word hit exactly where he aimed it. Payroll meant workers. Payroll meant families. Payroll meant rent, groceries, car payments, medicine, school lunches. Angela looked at Robert, and her expression hardened into the look of someone choosing the damage she could explain over the danger she could not yet prove. "We proceed toward noon," she said. "Legal will review in parallel. Robert, you are removed from the archive process effective immediately. Your badge access is limited to the storage room only until further notice. If you discuss this matter with employees, vendors, the bank, or the buyer, you will be suspended pending formal review." Sophie stood up outside the glass. Robert did not move. The old factory ledger remained open on the table, the tiny triangle still pointing to a condition no one had resolved. Martin closed his leather folder with a soft snap. Angela picked up the blue sale packet. The banker stayed silent. David Bell looked at the ledger as if it had just become a warning he could not stop in time. Robert looked at Angela and said, "If you sign before finding that release, you may not be saving payroll. You may be selling a fight." Angela held his gaze, tired, cornered, and still convinced that speed was the only bridge left. "Then I will cross that bridge," she said, "because this company cannot survive standing still." At 11:12, Angela Pierce made the decision she had been trying not to make. She stood in the legal office with the blue sale packet in one hand, the old factory ledger with ownership entries open on the table, and Robert Hayes standing across from her like a man who had already been judged before the evidence finished speaking. Behind the glass wall, Sophie held her handmade factory drawing against her chest. The drawing was bent now, the bright red factory creased down the middle, the little figure of her father almost folded out of sight. Martin Cole stood near the door, quiet for once, because he knew silence could be useful when someone else was about to do the damage for him. Angela looked at Robert and said, "Your employment is suspended pending review." The words were clean, corporate, careful. They did not sound like rent. They did not sound like a school lunch account. They did not sound like a father driving home with his daughter before noon because he had asked the wrong question in the wrong room. But Robert heard all of that inside them. Suspended, he repeated. Angela's face stayed firm. Effective immediately. You were instructed to stop investigating. You continued. You involved outside record questions, challenged a transaction in front of staff, and created uncertainty during a critical closing process. Robert looked at the ledger. I created uncertainty because the record is uncertain. Martin exhaled as if he had been patient for too long. No, Robert. You created confusion because you confused your job with authority. There is a difference. David Bell, the company counsel, looked down at the table but did not speak. He had not found the trustee release. He had not cleared the title concern. But the clock was moving, the bank was waiting, the buyer was waiting, and when rooms fill with pressure, quiet people often disappear first. Angela placed the blue folder on the table. Security will collect your badge. Human resources will contact you by the end of the day. Sophie stepped into the doorway before Robert could answer. But he was helping, she said. Her voice was small, but it cut through the room more sharply than Martin's polished words. Everyone turned. Sophie looked at Angela, then at the old ledger, then at Martin. My dad did not do anything wrong. Robert walked to her quickly and knelt, lowering his voice. Sophie. He found the little triangle, she said, holding up her drawing. He found the missing box. Why is he the one leaving? No one answered. Not Angela. Not David. Not the banker on the speakerphone. Martin gave a thin smile that tried to look gentle. Because grown-up business is more complicated than drawings and old books. Sophie's face changed. She did not cry, but something in her eyes closed. Robert stood slowly. That sentence hurt him more than the suspension. Not because it insulted him, but because it taught his daughter how powerful people sometimes made children feel foolish for seeing clearly. He unclipped his badge from his shirt pocket and placed it on the table beside the ledger. The badge looked small there. Smaller than the blue sale packet. Smaller than Martin's leather folder. Smaller than the old book everyone had been trying not to read. I kept those records for 6 years, Robert said. Not for myself. For the company. Angela's voice softened, but only a little. Then let the company handle them now. Robert looked at her for a long moment. That is what worries me. Martin moved toward the door. Security is waiting. Robert picked up Sophie's backpack from the bench outside the office. Sophie kept her drawing in both hands. As they walked through the hallway, people watched from doorways and desk corners. Some looked sorry. Some looked curious. Some looked away because looking away is easier than admitting you are seeing something unfair. Near the front lobby, a junior legal assistant named Emily Foster stood holding a stack of copies from the archive scanner. She was 24, new to the company, and still young enough to believe that if a document looked wrong, someone would want to know. She had been asked to scan the ledger pages, the green archive symbols binder, and the sign-out sheet before David Bell prepared the risk memo. She saw Robert being escorted toward the exit and froze with the copies in her hand. The old factory ledger with ownership entries had left faint shadows on the scan, including the pencil triangle beside the parcel number. Emily had enlarged the image to make the handwriting easier to read. That was when she noticed something no one else had seen. The triangle was not beside one parcel number. It was beside 3. The main plant, the east loading yard, the railroad strip. 3 pieces of land listed in 3 places, all tied to the same trust condition. She looked at the glossy sale packet Martin had provided. It listed the property as one clean parcel. One sale, one owner, one signature. Emily felt a cold, sinking feeling in her stomach. She turned back toward the legal office, then looked again at Robert walking through the lobby with Sophie. For a second, she almost called out. But she was junior. Brand new. Still on probation. Martin Cole was operations director. Angela Pierce was chief executive officer. Robert Hayes was being removed for saying exactly what she was now beginning to see. So Emily did what careful people do when they are scared but honest. She made another copy. Then another. She slipped one enlarged scan under David Bell's risk memo folder and wrote 3 parcels in pencil on a sticky note. Robert reached the front doors. The security supervisor stood beside him, uncomfortable, holding a clipboard. "I am sorry, Robert," he said quietly. "I have to log the badge return." Robert nodded. "Do your job. I know you were trying to do yours." Robert did not answer. He looked back once. Through the glass walls, he could see the legal office. Angela was at the table. Martin stood beside her, pointing to the signature tabs. David Bell was flipping through papers. The old ledger was still open, but no one was leaning over it now. It looked abandoned in the middle of the room, like a witness everyone had asked to wait outside. Sophie pulled on Robert's sleeve. "Dad, are we going to be okay?" He looked down at her drawing. The little factory she had made from crayon and hope. The gray cabinet. The old book. The tiny triangle she had added in the corner because she believed small marks could matter. "We are going to tell the truth," he said. "That is where okay starts." They stepped outside into the parking lot. The winter air was sharp. Robert had no badge, no schedule, and no idea whether he would have a paycheck on Friday. Inside the building, the investor call resumed. Martin's voice filled the conference room with confidence. He said the interruption had been handled. He said the sale could still close by noon. He said the company was aligned. Angela listened, tired and cornered, and let him speak. Then, 5 minutes after Robert and Sophie drove away, David Bell opened his risk memo folder and found Emily's enlarged scan. 3 parcels. 3 triangle marks. 1 missing release. His face went pale. He walked quickly to the ledger, turned the pages, and checked the entries himself. The experts had reviewed the summary. The bank had reviewed the packet. The board had reviewed the deal. But the junior assistant had reviewed the mark. And in that quiet legal office, while Martin Cole prepared to move the sale forward, the first real crack appeared in the story everyone had believed. By 11:37, the crisis had left the legal office and entered the rest of Pierce Manufacturing. It started with 1 phone call from the bank, then a second call from the buyer's attorney, then a message from the board chair asking why an ownership question had appeared in the closing risk memo minutes before signature. The words moved faster than people. Title issue. Missing release. 3 parcels. Trustee condition. Potential dispute. By 11:40, the investor room no longer sounded like a place where people were waiting to sign. It sounded like a place where people were preparing to blame someone. Angela Pierce stood at the head of the boardroom table with the blue sale packet open in front of her, but nobody was looking at the signature line anymore. On the large wall screen, a county parcel map was displayed beside 3 enlarged scans from the old factory ledger with ownership entries. The tiny triangle marks had been circled in yellow by Emily Foster, the junior legal assistant who had found what the experts missed. David Bell stood near the screen, speaking carefully, but his careful voice could not hide the damage. The original ledger shows 3 separate parcels tied to the same restricted transfer notation. The digital sale packet treats them as one clean asset. We still do not have the trustee release. The board chair's face appeared on the video call, stiff and red under the office lighting. "Are you telling me we cannot sell the factory?" David took a breath. "I am saying we cannot responsibly close in the next 23 minutes without confirming whether the release exists." Martin Cole stepped forward before Angela could answer. "This is a document control problem, not an ownership failure. The release may be in storage. It may be in county records. It may have been scanned under another index name. We are turning an archive inconsistency into a public emergency." Angela looked at him. "Where is box R17? Martin's face stayed calm. "I told you. Operations requested several boxes. We are searching." "You have been searching for almost an hour," David said. Martin turned on him. "Because your office let a junior assistant turn a pencil mark into a board-level panic." Emily, standing near the copier with the enlarged scans in her hands, lowered her eyes. Angela saw it. For 1 second, she heard Sophie again. "Why is he the one leaving?" It echoed in her mind because it had the shape of the question she had avoided all morning. The buyer's attorney came through the speakerphone. "We need a decision. If Pierce Manufacturing cannot represent clean authority to convey the property, Our client will reserve all rights under the walk-away clause. The banker joined in, his voice flat. And the bank needs clarity before covenant review. If the sale does not close today, we will require immediate restrictions on discretionary disbursements until the liquidity plan is revised. The payroll clerk was now standing in the doorway, pale and silent. Factory supervisors had gathered in the hall. Rumor had reached the floor. Workers were asking if paychecks were delayed. Vendors were asking if shipments should stop. The crisis was no longer hidden in paper. It was public enough to frighten people and still not clear enough to solve. Angela looked down at the sale packet. For the first time, the clean documents looked thin. Martin leaned close and lowered his voice. Angela, sign with a reserve. David can draft the protection language. If we stop now, the bank tightens, the buyer walks, and everyone downstairs feels it by Monday. Robert Hayes is gone. Do not let his confusion become your company's collapse. That was when David Bell said something nobody expected. We need Robert back. The room went silent for half a second. Martin laughed once. Absolutely not. David did not look at him. He knows the archive system. He knows the sign-out logs. He knows where Mrs. Hanley's cross-reference binders are. We have 20 minutes, and everyone in this room has already failed to find the release. Angela's jaw tightened. It was not easy for a chief executive officer to hear that the room full of experts had failed where a storage room clerk might help. But leadership is sometimes the moment when pride becomes more expensive than humility. She looked at the clock. 11:42. 18 minutes before noon. Call him, she said. Martin turned sharply. Angela, call him. Robert Hayes was 3 miles away, sitting in his blue pickup outside Sophie's elementary school. He had planned to take her inside, sign the late slip, and drive home to wait for human resources to decide how much of his life could be taken in one email. Sophie sat beside him, still holding her handmade factory drawing. Neither of them had spoken much during the drive. When Robert's phone rang, he almost did not answer. The screen showed Pierce Manufacturing. Sophie looked at it, then at him. Is it them? Robert nodded. He answered quietly. This is Robert. Angela's voice came through, no longer sharp, no longer certain. Mr. Hayes, this is Angela Pierce. We need you to return. Robert closed his eyes for a moment. Not because he felt victory. He did not. A man with rent due and a suspended badge does not feel victory when the people who dismissed him finally need him. He feels the weight of choosing whether dignity means walking away or going back because the truth still matters. Why, he asked. Angela paused. Because there are 3 parcels with the same restricted mark. Because Box R17 is missing. Because we cannot find the trustee release. And because you may know where to look. Sophie leaned closer, listening. Robert looked at her drawing. The little factory. The old book. The tiny triangle in the corner. He thought about the workers on the floor, the payroll clerk in the hallway, the people who did not know their jobs were being traded inside a clock. He did not go back for Angela. He did not go back to prove Martin wrong. He went back because his daughter had watched him tell the truth. And now she needed to see that truth was not something you used only when it protected your pride. I will come, he said. But I want David Bell in the room, and I want Sophie with me. Angela did not argue. Yes. 10 minutes later, Robert walked back into Pierce Manufacturing with Sophie at his side. He no longer had a badge, so security had to open the door for him. That detail did not escape anyone. The man who might save the sale, or stop it, had to be let in like a visitor. Employees watched from the hall as he passed. Some looked embarrassed. Some looked hopeful. Emily Foster stood near the legal office holding the enlarged scan. When Robert saw her, he nodded once. She nodded back, almost relieved enough to cry. In the boardroom, the old factory ledger with ownership entries had been placed in the center of the table under the bright white lights. On the wall screen, page 112, page 113, and the 3 parcel entries were displayed side by side. Angela stood at the head of the table. Martin stood near the blue sale packet, his hand resting on it like possession. Sophie stopped just inside the door, clutching her handmade factory drawing. Robert looked at the ledger, then at the screen. He did not rush. He did not perform. He simply walked to the table and turned the ledger back 2 pages, then forward 1 page, then opened the green archive symbols binder beside it. The release is not in box R17, he said. Martin frowned. You just said the box mattered. It does, Robert said. But the ledger tells us where the release should have been filed before it ever reached that box. He pointed to a small notation under the third parcel entry. This abbreviation is not a clerk's initials. It is an index code. C.R. County Clerk Record. Then there is a dash and a number. David leaned in. Book and page. Robert nodded. Book and page. Angela stepped closer. Can we verify that now? Emily was already at the laptop. Her fingers moved quickly. David gave her access to the county records portal. The room waited while the screen loaded. The buyer's attorney stayed on speaker. The banker stayed silent. Martin's face had gone still in a way that did not look calm anymore. Emily typed the code. A scanned county record appeared. The document was old, but readable. Trustee release request. Rejected. Missing required signatures. No conveyance authority granted. David whispered, no release. Robert turned one more page in the ledger. And that is why the triangle was never crossed out. Angela looked at the screen, then at Martin. The truth did not arrive like thunder. It arrived like a page loading on a computer, like ink from a forgotten ledger, matching a county record everyone should have checked. Martin said, this is being misread. Robert looked at him and spoke with the quiet steadiness of a man who no longer needed permission to be believed. Power talks first. Proof talks last. The room goes silent. And it did. No one moved. No one reached for the sale packet. No one defended the noon deadline. The old factory ledger lay open in the center of the table, no longer worthless, no longer dusty, no longer small. It had said one thing all morning, and now the whole room finally heard it. Pierce Manufacturing could not sell what it had never fully owned. For several seconds after Robert Hayes spoke, nobody in the boardroom moved toward the sale packet. The noon deadline still sat on the wall clock like a threat, but it no longer controlled the room. The old factory ledger with ownership entries lay open under the bright white lights, and beside it on the screen was the county record that said what Martin Cole had tried to outrun. No release. Missing required signatures. No conveyance authority granted. Angela Pierce stood very still at the head of the table. She had been called decisive her whole career, but in that moment she learned that speed without truth was not leadership. It was just a cleaner way to make a mistake. The buyer's attorney cleared his throat through the speakerphone. Miss Pierce, does your company intend to proceed with closing? Angela looked at the blue sale packet, then at the ledger, then at Robert. He was still standing beside the table in his faded work shirt, still without his badge, still the same white American single dad and storage room clerk she had sent out of the building less than an hour earlier. Sophie stood near the door, holding her handmade factory, drawing so tightly the edges curled in her fingers. Angela saw the little crayon factory, the small gray cabinet, the old book, and the tiny triangle Sophie had drawn in one corner. It looked simple. It looked childish. It also looked more honest than the deal packet in front of her. Angela took a slow breath. No, she said. Pierce Manufacturing does not intend to proceed with closing today. Martin's head turned sharply. Angela. She did not look at him. The sale is suspended pending independent title review, board review, and legal audit. The board chair on the video call leaned forward. Suspended? Do you understand what that may trigger with the bank? Angela turned toward the screen. I understand. I also understand we were minutes away from representing clean authority over property we may not have full right to convey. That is not a risk memo. That is a failure waiting to become public. The banker spoke next, more carefully now. The bank will need an updated liquidity plan by close of business. You will have one, Angela said, and it will not be built on a defective sale. Martin stepped toward her. You are letting a storage clerk and an old ledger cost this company its bridge financing. Robert said nothing. He did not need to. The proof had already spoken. Angela finally turned to Martin. Her voice was quiet, but it carried through the boardroom and into the hallway where supervisors, legal staff, and office employees had gathered. No, Martin. I let you push this company toward a sale without a complete record. That ends now. Martin's face tightened. I provided the title summary legal approved. David Bell stepped forward. You provided a packet that omitted restricted transfer marks, the continuation page, and any reference to the rejected trustee release. Emily Foster, the junior legal assistant, held up the enlarged scan. And box R17 is still missing from archive return. Angela looked at Martin. Effective immediately, you are removed from all authority over the factory sale, property records, and operations decisions related to this transaction. Your access will be limited pending board review. David, notify outside counsel. Emily, preserve every scan, sign-out sheet, email request, and archive log. I want a full record chain. Martin looked around the room, searching for the same support that had followed him all morning. But power is different when proof enters the room. People who had nodded at him before now looked at the table, at the screen, at the old ledger, anywhere except his face. This is an overreaction, he said. Angela answered, no. The overreaction was suspending the man who tried to show us the missing page. Then she turned toward Robert. The boardroom was full now. Employees stood in the hallway. The payroll clerk was near the door. The security supervisor who had collected Robert's badge stood behind the glass wall, looking uncomfortable. Sophie stood beside her father. Angela did not send anyone out. She did not ask for privacy. Some apologies need witnesses because the mistake had witnesses. Mr. Hayes, she said, I was wrong. Robert looked at her, but he did not soften immediately. He had heard corporate voices turn polite only after they needed something. Angela seemed to understand that. She continued, I called your ledger worthless. I dismissed your warning. I allowed you to be treated like a problem when you were protecting the company. I suspended your employment while relying on people who had not checked what you checked. That was my failure. The room stayed quiet. Sophie looked up at Robert. He held her shoulder gently, not to stop her from speaking, but to let her know he was still there. Angela reached toward the table and picked up Robert's badge. For a moment, she held it beside the ledger. The small plastic card looked different now, not like a low-status pass, like proof that the person closest to the records had been the person closest to the truth. Angela walked around the table and handed it back to him. Your suspension is ended. Your employment record will be corrected today. You will be formally credited in the board minutes for identifying the ownership defect before closing. If you are willing, I want you assigned to a temporary records integrity team with legal, reporting directly to David Bell until the audit is complete. Robert took the badge, but he did not clip it on right away. I am willing to help protect the records, he said. But I do not want this turned into a story about one man saving a company. Angela nodded slowly. What should it be about? Robert looked at the ledger. It should be about not throwing away proof because the person holding it has a smaller title. That sentence moved through the room more deeply than any board motion could have. The payroll clerk wiped one eye quickly and looked away. Emily Foster smiled down at her papers. David Bell closed the blue sale packet and placed it aside, no longer at the center of the table. The old ledger stayed where it was. For once, the oldest document in the room had the most authority. By 2 o'clock, Pierce Manufacturing issued a formal internal notice. The factory sale was paused pending independent legal review. Payroll would continue under a revised bank agreement while the company prepared a corrected liquidity plan. Outside counsel would review the attempted transaction. Operations Director Martin Cole was placed on administrative leave pending audit and board investigation into the missing archive box, the incomplete sale packet, and possible self-dealing related to the buyer. There was no shouting, no dramatic punishment in the hallway, just calendar invites, locked access, document holds, and the slow machinery of consequence. Sometimes justice does not look loud. Sometimes it looks like a man's access being removed from the system he thought he controlled. Later that afternoon, after the board call ended and the workers returned to their stations, Robert brought the old factory ledger with ownership entries back to the storage room. This time, Angela walked with him. So did Sophie. The same hallway that had watched Robert leave now watched him return. He did not raise his chin higher than before. He did not smile like a winner. He walked the way he always had, steady and quiet, carrying the ledger with both hands. In the storage room, David had already ordered a fireproof records cabinet, but it had not arrived yet. So Robert placed the ledger in its old dry cabinet for one more night, wrapped in clean brown paper, with a new sign-out tag attached to the cover. Sophie taped her handmade factory drawing to the outside of the cabinet door. Angela looked at it for a long time. She drew the ledger before any of us understood it, Angela said. Robert smiled faintly. Children notice what adults step over. Sophie looked at Angela. Are you going to sell the factory? Angela knelt slightly so she could meet her eyes. Not until we know the truth, and not to anyone who plans to bury it. Sophie seemed to accept that. She touched the drawing once, smoothing the corner near the tiny triangle. Robert closed the cabinet door, then rested his hand on it for a moment. He was not putting the ledger away for revenge. He was putting it away because truth needs a safe place after it has done its work. Angela stood beside him, no longer above him at the head of a table, but next to him in the room where the company had almost lost its memory. "I thought value was what appeared on a report," she said. Robert looked at the rows of boxes, the old labels, the quiet shelves. "Reports matter," he said, "but they only tell the truth when the records behind them are whole." Sophie slipped her hand into his. The day had cost them both something. Fear, shame, a little trust. But it had also given Sophie a lesson no classroom could have taught as clearly. Her father had not won by being loud. He had not won by being rich. He had not won by having a title that made people stand when he entered. He had won by keeping the record, asking the right question, and refusing to let old truth be thrown away for new convenience. Robert clipped his badge back onto his shirt. It was the same badge as before. Same name, same job, same small black letters. But the people who saw it now would read it differently. Angela turned off the storage room light as they left, and the ledger rested in the cabinet, quiet again. Not worthless, not forgotten. Waiting, if needed, to remind powerful people that ownership is not proven by confidence, and truth is not erased by dust. And the moral was simple. Never let someone call your proof worthless just because it is older than their lie.